business goes through its financial statement to see how they are doing. Right? So one tool that is used for financial statement analysis is ratio analysis. Okay, so we're going to use some financial ratios to see how the company is performing. Okay, so the company we're looking at is Chilanga Cement. Okay, this is financial statement for 2024 and 2023. Right? So we're going to look at the first set of ratios, which are called the profitability ratios. Okay, so remember, profitability is the ability to generate profit from your operations. Okay, so basically generating profit from your operations in simple words. Okay, colleagues, generating profit from your operations. Okay, so we're going to start with the first profitability ratios, which are the margin ratios. Okay, we'll start with the gross profit margin. Okay, the gross profit margin tells us how much gross profit we make for every 1 quarter in sales revenue. Okay. Or the other way to look at it, what percent of the sales revenue is gross profit? Okay. The other way to look at it, what percent of the sales revenue is gross profit? Okay. So based on the financial statements here that we have, okay, we already have our revenue here that has been given to us, and our gross profit, we already have it here. Alright, so we just need to divide. This is the formula for the gross profit margin. Okay, it's your gross profit divided by your sales revenue. Okay, this is the formula here. Gross profit divided by sales revenue. So remember one trick for the margin ratios, alright? The denominator is going to always be your sales revenue. Okay. So if we come to our table here, which I made here in Excel, the revenue here, we have it as 2,719,535, and our gross profit is here, 1,118,950,000. Okay, so if you get our gross profit margin, gross profit divided by sales revenue, we're going to get 0.521. Okay, so we can just round it off to 2 decimal places. Okay, 0.52. So how we interpret this, for every 1 quarter we make in sales revenue, 52 ngwe is the gross profit. Okay, or gross profit is 52% of sales revenue. Those are the 2 ways you can look at it. For every 1 quarter we make in sales revenue, 52 ngwe is our gross profit. Right? Or gross profit is 52% of the sales revenue. Now with ratio analysis, you always want to compare with the previous year or previous years, or against another company or against the industry, so that you can see if you've been doing better. So if we come to 2023, we have our revenue here. here. Okay, so our gross profit margin, gross profit divided by sales revenue, gets 0.54. So in 2023, for everyone kwacha Chinanga Cement made in sales revenue, 54 ngwe was gross profit. Or 54% of the sales revenue was gross profit in 2023. Right. So we can see our gross profit margin has dropped. Okay. Our gross profit margin has dropped. So we must look into the factors and see what could be the reason why our gross profit margin dropped. Okay. So if you remember, let's look at our revenue here. Okay, let's see how much did our revenue grow by. Okay, so we just find what was the percent change in revenue. Okay, so remember, percent change, new minus old divided by old. So the new value is the value in 2024, the old value is in 2023. Okay? Yes, that's how you get a percentage change. Just your new value minus the old value divided by the old value multiplied by 100. Okay, so the new value for 2024 minus the old value divided by the old value is 0.34. Okay, so this represents a 34% increment. Okay, 34% increment in sales revenue. Section here. Yeah, 34% growth. Okay. So colleagues, we've seen that the sales revenue has grown. Okay. But our gross profit margin dropped. Okay. The amount of gross profit we're making from every sale has dropped. So let's find out also the gross profit. How much did it grow? Okay, or did it fall? So the value for 2024 minus the value for 2023 divided by the value for 2023, we get 0.296, which tells us gross profit grew by 30%. So that's also a good sign. Our gross profit has also grown. Okay, our revenue has grown, but our gross profit has also grown. Okay, but our margin has dropped. Okay, how much gross profit we're making from each sale, that has dropped. Okay, so we can look at another factor. Okay, we can say that okay, there should be another factor that we need to consider to see why this have a drop in the margins. So we haven't been given the cost of sales in the financial statements, so we need to tabulate them by ourselves. Okay, if you remember from financial accounting, your gross profit is your sales revenue minus your cost of goods sold. Okay, so to get our cost of goods sold, we just have to subtract our revenue minus our gross profit. Okay, to get the cost of goods sold. Okay, so which I've done here, but let me just do it again. Yes. So our revenue minus the gross profit. This is our cost of goods sold, 1,300,585,000. Okay, and also here This is our gross profit, 929 million. Okay. So we have to find out, okay, you can see our cost of sales increased, but by how much? Okay, so the same thing we're going to do. See the percent change. Okay. So basically our cost of sales increased by 40%. Okay. So this is the reason why the gross profit we're making from each sale dropped, because the costs increased by 40%. The costs outgrew the profit. Okay, so when the costs outgrow the profit, it means in gross profit your ratios are going to drop. Okay, it also, the cost also the cost growth also exceeded the revenue growth. Okay, revenue and profit increased by 30 and 34%, but the cost of sales increased by 40%. That's why our gross profit margin has dropped, because our cost of sales exceeded the profit and the revenue growth. Okay. Then another factor, okay, if you look at this ratio, you can see that revenue is in the denominator here. Okay, so this is something you have to understand, since we're using mathematics here. Okay, if the denominator grows more than the numerator, there will be a drop. Okay, if your denominator grows more than the numerator, you're going to have a drop here. Okay, so if you also look here, our revenue growth was by 34%, but our profit growth was 30%. So our revenue outgrew our profit. Alright. Now remember, revenue doesn't include any costs. You just talk about how much you sold. Alright. But the profit, since the cost of sales increased, that's why our profits growth also was hindered. Yeah. So I just need you to remember that mathematical relationship for these kinds of ratios. If the denominator grows more than the numerator, expect a drop. Okay. So here our main culprit was the growth of cost of sales. Any questions before we proceed? Okay, we're now going to look at the operating profit margin. Okay, so if gross profit margin tells you how much gross profit you make for every one quarter sales revenue, operating profit margin tells you how much operating profit we make for every one quarter sales revenue. Okay. Or what percent of sales revenue is operating profit? So think of these margins, think of the sales like a pie, right? So each of these margins is taking a share of the pie. Gross profit margin is taking a certain share of the pie. Operating profit margin will take a certain percentage of the share of the pie. Okay? So we have our operating profit margin. As you can see, the formula is the same here. Okay? Operating profit divided by sales revenue. Alright? So let me retabulate so that you see the figures here. So to get our operating profit margin, say our operating profit 737,676,000 divided by our total sales revenue, 0.27, which tells us for every 1 kwacha made in sales revenue, 27 ngwe was operating profit. Okay, or operating profit is 27% of our sales revenue. Okay, operating profit is 27% of our sales revenue. That is for 2024. Right. And for 2023, operating profit divided by sales revenue is 0.318. Rounded off to 2 decimals, 0.32. So in 2023, for every 1 kwacha we made, Shilanga Cement made in sales revenue, 32 ngwe was operating profit. Okay, so colleagues, we see again another decline in the margin. Okay, we're making less operating profit for every sale. That's what this is telling us. Okay, colleagues, we are making less operating profit for every sale. Okay, so first things first, let's see by how much it dropped. New value, the 2024 value, minus the old value, the 2023 value, divided by the old value, 2023 value. Okay, it dropped by approximately 14, or say 15% to 2 decimal places. Okay, our operating profit margin dropped by 15%. Okay, so we need to find out what could be the causes of this operating profit margin dropping. Okay. So we need to find out what were our operating expenses. Okay, because after you get your gross profit in a financial statement, okay, as you can see here. After you get your gross profit, you need to subtract your operating expenses to get your operating profit. Okay? So, we need to tabulate for ourselves the operating expenses. Okay? Because as we saw, revenue has grown. Let's also our operating profit. Let's analyze by how much has it grown by. So basically with these margins, colleagues, we want our profits growth to exceed the revenues growth. If the profits growth exceeds the revenues growth, we are going to see increases in these ratios. Okay? Okay, so operating profit grew by 14%. 14% growth. Okay. So, as we can see, our revenues growth outpaced our operating profits growth. Our revenue grew by 34%, but our operating profit only grew by 14%. Okay. That's one cause. Okay, but we have to find the operating expenses, because they can tell us they can be the main factor. Okay, so to get your operating expenses, okay, it's your gross profit minus your operating profit. Okay, gross profit minus operating profit. That will give you your operating expenses. So gross profit here let me just do this. Please just give me 2 minutes. so it's gross profit minus operating profit. We get 681,274. Any questions? Sorry about that, colleagues, was kicked out. Yes, I was saying we're getting our operating profits, our operating expenses, to see the group, to find out how much they grew by. Okay, so your operating expense is your gross profit. Okay, gross profit minus operating profit. Okay, 681,274,000. That's for 2024. For 2023, gross profit minus operating profit, 450,223,000. So colleagues, we can say that our operating expenses increased. Okay, we find out by how much did they increase. Okay, so by 51%. Okay, that is a big increase. Okay, 51%. So our operating expenses outgrew our sales revenue and our operating profit. So that is the main reason why our margin dropped. The main reason why we're making less operating profit for every sale, because our operating expenses increased. Right? That's what hindered the growth of the operating profit. That's why our operating profits drop, or this increase is very small, because these operating expenses slowed that. Okay? Any questions, colleagues, so far? Any questions, queries? Wonderful. Yes, so our operating profit dropped by a big amount. Okay. Yes. The next margin is the net profit margin. Okay. How much net profit you're making for every 1 kwacha sales. Okay. So we have our net profits given to us in the financial statement, this which says profit for the year. This is the net profit. Okay, so the net profit margin, as you can see the formula, just your net profit divided by your revenue. As I said, with these profitability ratios, just remember sales revenue is always going to be your denominator. So our ratio is 0.21. Okay. So for every 1 kwacha we make in sales revenue, 21 ngwe is our net profit. Yeah, 21 ngwe is the net profit. For 2023, it's your net profit, profit of the year, divided by the sales revenue, 0.22. Okay. So for every 1 kwacha sell, you made 22 ngwe in net profit. Okay? So this is like a minor drop. You see, by what percent has it dropped? By 5% approximately. Okay? 5% drop. Okay? So we have to now look and investigate what could have caused the net profit to drop. Okay. So if you remember, in financial statements, after you get your operating profit, which is your profit before interest and taxes, you need to deduct interest and you need to deduct taxes. Okay, those are the two main expenses you deduct to get your from your operating profit to get your net profit. Okay, so if we come to our income statement here, okay, you can see, okay, we have investment income, okay, which increased, right? And then we also have finance costs. Okay, these we have to invest these costs and see by what percent did they grow. Okay, so if we see for 2024 it was 13,100,000. Right. In 2023, our investment costs, our finance costs, so colleagues, these finance costs, these are the interest payments you make. Okay. So we see they increased. Okay, so they could be the reason why our net profit margin dropped. Okay, so I just want to tabulate the percent growth. Whoa, 75%. That's a big growth. Okay, basically 76%. So the finance costs increased by 76%. Okay. So I think why our net profit margin did not drastically drop, because notice, colleagues, our net profit margin hasn't drastically dropped. Okay. It's just dropped by 5%. Even though the finance costs increased by 76%, our margin just dropped by 5%. So probably this could be due to the increase in the investment income. Okay. This investment income's increase could have slowed down that increment. Okay. I mean, slowed the drop of the net profit margin. Okay. So, in terms of profitability, Chilanga Cement is making less profit for every 1 kwacha it makes in sales revenue. It's making less gross profit, less net profit, and less operating profit as compared to 2023. The main reason is because our costs have increased. Okay, cost of sales increased by 40%. Operating expenses increased by 51%. Finance costs increased by 76%. Okay, so that's why the ratios have dropped. So probably the increase of these costs could be due to various factors. Okay, various macroeconomic factors. Okay, you can factor in load shedding. Okay, load shedding. Factories now need to get generators. Generators now have to put in a diesel. Okay, you can also include inflation. Okay, maybe prices of raw materials increased. Okay, prices of raw materials increased. Okay, probably Chilanga Cement, as we saw, finance costs increased by 76%. Okay, so probably they had to acquire more debt. probably to finance these costs.